It's time for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Craig, this has been an incredible week since the president returned to the campaign trail after surviving his bout with COVID-19. He has now described himself as a Superman for his quick recovery, but his poll numbers remain exceptionally low nonetheless. Is there a way that Mr. Trump can turn this around with only 3 weeks to go?
Certainly don't see how he turns things around. I do want to start with a positive note. I have actually found the hearings on the Supreme Court Justice for Amy Coney Barrett to be rather compelling. And you know, you can agree or disagree with some of her choices personally, and perhaps some of her writings in the court or whatever. But in terms of the quality of the individual and her ability to sit for 11 hours up against senators who are reading basically from binders that are with information compiled by staff and experts, all to try to get at her, or at least half of them trying to get at her, was pretty remarkable. And I would say this about the selection: had Trump's choice not been able to sustain the quality of discussion and the level-headedness that we saw, it would have been a real negative working against him at the very time he's trying to get out and campaign. So in that regard, I would say his choice helped him. She looked certain to go to the court. And honestly, you know, in my view, may well distinguish herself as a rather remarkable justice over time. Time will tell on that. With regard to the campaign outings, I think it's a case of self-indulgence. This is what he loves, and he's willing to risk others to have the adulation of crowds who stand around for hours and hours before he even takes off to go see them. So I don't understand it. It's certainly, you know, but not only is he speaking to his base, he's probably infecting his base, which cannot help him come election day. So I don't understand that.
Al, chime in.
Well, I don't think that his running around the country and acting unhinged is gonna turn the election around. He's in too deep a hole. The race is too set. It would take a real earthquake, and anything's possible, but I think it's very unlikely. His strategy seems to be his only hope is really to suppress the vote and run down Joe Biden, and that clearly isn't working. Now, Craig talked about riling up his base, and I'm sure he's trying to do that. But the only people who I think are more intense than Trump's base are the people who stood in line in Georgia for 11 hours to vote. The intensity of the opposition to him is pretty great, and they are voting at a pretty fast rate, which means that there can be less and less impact by the late campaigning anyway, because people have already voted. He thinks he can do what he did in 2016, but this isn't 2016. And the other thing to remember, I mean, Trump is viewed as this vaunted candidate, but he didn't win by very much in 2016, and 100,000 votes spread over 3 states would have made it a normal election. And I had to do a presentation last night to the graduate school at Johns Hopkins. So I actually had to look at these numbers pretty carefully. And this is just not 2016. Nationally, according to the 538 average of polls, which I think is a little better than Real Clear Politics, because Nate Silver actually takes into account the quality of the polls and the sample size. And you don't have these outlier polls like Trafalgar, for example, which always has a certain outcome. But the Nate Silver has it at 10.5 margin nationally, which is going up. In all the battleground states, both Silver and Real Clear Politics average, as of at least last night. There are 16 states that were decided by less than 10% in 2016. Trump won 9 of them. Biden is now leading in all 16, some by a very small margin, but he's leading in all 16. It's just a lot to turn around. And the other thing is, what really turned the race for Trump last time is there was about almost a fifth of the electorate who had unfavorable opinions of both candidates. And he won them overwhelmingly, and he won them overwhelmingly, even more overwhelmingly in the swing states. And if you look at the national polling now, first of all, Biden's approval rating has gone up despite all the attacks. It's positive in the last several polls. And in those swing states, the 3 I took a look at were Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which are enough to put Biden over the top. He's running about 30 points better in favorable, unfavorable than Hillary Clinton did. And so I just don't think any of the late campaign tactics.
Well, I want to come back because Craig said some very positive thoughts about the Supreme Court nominees hearings. What did you take away from
I think the larger story is the priority choice that the Republicans in the Senate made. They had a choice. They could rush through this nominee in record time, and she's a perfectly fine woman. I think she's probably represents a politics that is not necessarily the future of the country, but more the past. But you know, that'll be fought out. She'll probably be confirmed, and that'll be fought out when she's on the court. But the Republicans had a choice. They could have considered a COVID aid bill, and they didn't. They decided instead we're going to push through this nominee that most, still people like her personally, but a majority of the electorate thought that the next president should pick this nominee. So I think that says a lot. I don't think there's any doubt which side the parties are on and on this issue about helping COVID victims. Nancy Pelosi has a really difficult job because she's got to try to negotiate something with a pretty unreliable negotiating partner. I can't imagine, Trump's all over the board. One day he wants to cut off talks, the next day he wants to bring them back. They have an offer. I saw Pelosi on Wolf Blitzer last night. And, how can you negotiate with these people? The negotiators don't even know what the president's going to do. And, I think she mentioned there are some things in the Republican package that would take nice care of his friends while they cut the EITC, which both Craig's administration and mine tried to expand to help working poor people. Is it going to help? And personally, I think the details matter, but I don't think most people have any idea about what's going on in the negotiations and the details of the negotiations. But as I said, in the larger point, we sort of know what the Republican priorities are and what the Democrats' priorities are. And I just don't think that the Democrats will be penalized for not dealing with an erratic, unhinged, and untrustworthy negotiator.
Craig, back to you on this, because we did want to talk about the COVID package or the lack thereof. And, just on appearances alone, it would seem that the Republicans could use the fact that Pelosi was not going to compromise as an advantage for them.
Well, you may be right. You know, there's when you think back, we've been doing these shows for what, a few months, and the one thing that I guess Al and I both have gotten wrong is that there was going to be a package pretty soon, a second package. I am really surprised that they've let it go in an election year right down to the wire like this, and I do agree that the negotiators have probably had a difficult time knowing just where the administration was. Even the administration's negotiators don't always know where their principal is. So I'm sure it's been a huge burden. It's just that we're leaving so many people left without the support that they clearly need. I do think that there was in that interview with Nancy Pelosi, you saw a sense of just how frayed people are in this process. I heard some of the members of Congress speaking today who said that Democrats, she's our leader, but we're all kind of right up against the deadline here, and it's pretty difficult. So I'm surprised. I think the voters are going to blame Democrats. I suspect that in a way it's another failure in Washington to address an issue, and that probably ends up hurting the president more than anybody else.
Al, any final thoughts as we close up?
Well, the only thing that I thought, you know, I agree with Craig that Amy Coney Barrett is a pretty impressive candidate. She comes from my home, she's a law school professor at my hometown, South Bend, with Notre Dame. But you know, as I wrote in the SPY this week, you know, this effort, the combined effort of trying to suppress the vote, and I don't think there's any doubt about that because Vice President Pence talked about that in the debate, said we're court 40 in something like 40 states to try to basically limit the people who can vote, and the annex of Governor Abbott and others are pretty clear, and trying to push through the third nominee in 3 years, nominated by a president who didn't win a majority, and confirmed by a Senate that represents well less than a majority of the people, at a time the country itself is changing dramatically. You know, maybe it's the way checks and balances ought to work, but it seems to me it's mostly about trying to basically hold on to the last vestiges of power of the era that is passing. And the country as it is and as it will become even more will have a different perspective. Now that, in a way, is the way the checks and balances are supposed to work. In the court will be a break on some of the things that a Congress and a president representing the way the country's going would probably do. But in the end, I think that a President Biden and a Democratic Congress will have to operate sort of the way that Franklin Roosevelt did, and that is not packing the court, but in the end, trying to figure out ways to do things that will pass muster in the court and still achieve their agenda.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks again. See you next time.